saying you want a fair level of migration, you want it to be managed. What does that mean in practice?
Ending exploitation of migrant workers, ending undercutting of existing pay and conditions, and enforcing what is known as the Posting of Workers Directive, which is a slightly bizarre way of describing the way in which people are recruited to come to this country, indeed other countries, to undercut existing working conditions.
In brass tacks, though, does that mean that you would like to see more or fewer people from other parts of the European Union coming to the UK?
It probably means there would be fewer, but I think we should also recognise that there is a massive contribution made to our health service, education and manufacturing industry by people from all over Europe, and indeed there are a very large number, maybe 1.5, 2 million British people living in other parts of Europe making a contribution there as well. People come to this country, work hard, pay their taxes and are part of our community. But let's be accepting of that, because there's been some awful incidents over the past few months with a rise in hate crime and a rise in abuse.
But to be completely clear about what you're saying, you've just said you think there would be fewer people coming here from the rest of the EU, probably. Mm-hmm. But you've also said this morning, we're not saying anyone couldn't come.
Listen, we haven't got into Article 50 negotiations yet on market access to Europe, and that is key, because maybe almost half of our trade is with the European Union. Clearly that trade needs to continue if we're going to protect industries and jobs in Britain. And so these Brexit negotiations have got to focus on economic development.
But Mr. Corbyn, in terms of what you are saying probably you would see a reduction in the number of people coming here if you acted on the workplace, but also that you wouldn't actually stop anybody coming here.
Well,
now those two things for many of our viewers might sound slightly contradictory.
No, they're not contradictory at all. We end the exploitation because that has an effect on reducing everyone's working conditions and damaging everyone's working arrangements. What we're also saying is that one has to recognise, I'm sure everyone does, that without European doctors and nurses within our NHS, it would be in an even worse situation than it is at the present time.
But if you changed the rules for employers, but if you tightened up the rules for employers, in your view, even if workers were better protected, they could still be Romanian, French, Polish, Italian, Bulgarian?
They could be, but there'd be less incentive to recruit them, because if the proper conditions were there. But we recognise also there is a skill shortage. There is a shortage of doctors, there is a shortage of nurses. They're going to have to come from somewhere. Otherwise, waiting lists get longer, the crisis gets deeper in the NHS.
You say there would probably be fewer people coming here. By how many? What kind of reduction?
I can't put a figure on it because we haven't yet seen the work that has to be done on this. But the point I'm making...
What work has to be done on this? Because isn't this a question of principle, though, really? About the kind of levels that you're happy with?
That employers should not be allowed to tear up existing arrangements in the construction industry or other industries in order to deliberately undercut existing pay and conditions by bringing people in to do that work. That is what we would stop.
But how many of the 190,000 EU migrants that came here last year do you think are in those kinds of workplaces, are here and being exploited?
It's hard to put a figure on it because many of those are in 0 hours contracts or are working for agencies. But if you look at the report on Sport Direct, look at other companies that have done this, there needs to be a real assertion of good quality employment standards and good quality wages in this country.
And I think very few people would disagree with that.
Well, then fine.
But out of the numbers of people who've come here, nearly 200,000 from the European Union last year, how many of them do you think are here and being exploited and are here because of the kinds of exploitation
that you talk about?
Not all are being
exploited, but a considerable number. I don't have a figure I can put on it. What I do know is that it is happening in the agricultural sector, it's happening in the packaging sector, it's happening in warehousing, it's happening to some extent in retail industries.
But can you tell us today what you think a fair level of immigration would be? Because this is a huge matter of public concern. We've asked you previously whether or not you think the levels are too high, and you said that you don't think the levels are too high, and for many, many of your supporters, that is a proud principle that you've always stuck to. But have you changed your mind?
No. My mind is quite clear that we need to end the exploitation that's going on. We need to maintain a market access within Europe, and we need to ensure there are good relations between all communities.
So you have not changed your mind on the fact that you've always believed there are not too many immigrants here?
There are a lot of people in this country who make a fantastic contribution to our society, as indeed there are a large number of British people living in other parts of Europe, indeed in other parts of the world, who also make a contribution there.
But just to be completely clear about what you're saying today, your policy changes you think would probably bring down the numbers, but you still don't think that now the levels of immigration are too high, and you can't tell us how many people would be affected by the rule changes that you're proposing.
I want to deal with the worst aspects of exploitation first. Deal with that. That is a crucial one, which also would improve the working conditions for people in this country as well. Employers have had it too easy for too long to exploit people in often bad working conditions.
It sounds though rather, Mr Corbyn, that you are today trying to do exactly what the government has been accused of doing, though, having your cake and eat it, saying that you want to manage migration, you want to tackle the worst excesses of migration. You're a bit foggy on the numbers, but you still want to have single market access. Now, every European leader has been clear, we cannot have full membership of the single market unless we accept freedom of movement. But today you're saying you're not wedded to freedom of movement.
Freedom of movement is being exploited by unscrupulous employers. That is what I want to put an end to.
But do you or do you not want to end the wide principle of freedom of movement?
I want us to have market access in Europe. I want us to have trade with Europe, and let's.
And that means continuing with freedom of movement.
Let's see what comes out of these negotiations. But the crucial thing is that, and also the way in which the government is approaching this ought to be much more open, ought to be reporting to Parliament on what they're doing, and we indeed are working with socialist parties in government and in opposition across Europe in order to build a good relationship with them for the future of this country and the future of those negotiations.
Do you think our viewers could be forgiven for feeling a little bit confused about exactly what it is you are saying today?
I would hope our viewers would understand that this Brexit negotiation is very important, that access to a European market is very important, but also the kind of economy that we have in Britain and the direction we go. Are we going to continue going with enormous levels of inequality, lowering levels of corporate taxation, lowering levels of tax costs to the very richest in our society, whilst allowing poverty to rise, homelessness to rise, shortages in health and housing to get worse? I think we need some answers on that, and what I'm trying to frame out today is what Labour's economic alternative in Britain is and the social justice alternative.
And one of the proposals that you've given this morning that might be very appealing to some of your, many of your supporters is the idea of capping income. Now, do you really believe that in this country people should be told that they can earn no more than a certain amount?
I think you have to look at each company and say, well, is it really right that the chief executive should earn 100 or more times than those who are actually doing the work that are keeping that company going? I think we have to look at the issues of disparity within companies and within organisations.
But that's rather different than saying, as a Labour Prime Minister, you would cap the level of income. I mean, is that actually what you're saying?
We're
you would have a
consulting
top
on it, we're
level
discussing
of
it now. Either you do a cap or you look at the levels of disparity within organisations. Other countries have got some policies developing this, and I think we need to consult with them and learn some lessons on it. Because it can't be right that those that are actually doing the work are often living in work in poverty, whilst the chief executive is earning many, many millions.
Just finally, briefly, if I may, one of your biggest supporters, Len McCluskey, said just before Christmas, if the polls were still as bad as they are now for Labour in 2019, that you would consider your position. In fact, he said that John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn are not egomaniacs, they're not desperate to cling on to power for power's sake. If the polls don't budge.
Well, it's nice for you to say I'm not an egomaniac, and I certainly don't think I am. Listen, we've been through 2 leadership elections in a year. I've been elected a second time on a higher vote and a higher turnout and a large majority. That is amongst members and supporters. We now have to go out there and do the campaigning. The campaigning work on housing, campaigning work on health, campaigning work on economic investment and development. That's what we're doing.
But Len McCluskey knows you very well. He said if things don't change, you'll consider your position. Is he wrong?
Well, I don't quite know what Len meant by that. My position is I've been elected to lead this party, I'm proud to lead this party, and I'm utterly determined to create a better, fairer, more decent society in Britain where we don't have rising homelessness, we don't have people dying on trolleys in hospitals. We invest and proudly do so in our public services.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much.
Thank you.